And welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:10 p.m. in, yes, you guessed correctly, cold, miserable, dark, wet, rainy, overcast, dismal, sunless Budapest, where the shape and outline and color and texture of the sun is now but a distant memory. And it's only September. So everything is, uh, 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 as you would expect. So here's um, some interesting messages here. Um, so Ahmadovich now says, George, have you read The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, Paul Kennedy? And could you recommend some books for us to read? Well, yes, I have read Paul Kennedy's book. So it's not a bad book, but fairly familiar lines of argument. Um, yeah, I mean, most of it's then about the American, made the familiar um, points about America. I mean, the book, of course, did make an impact, but the impact was lessened by the fact that at that very moment the Soviet Union was collapsing, and so you know, if the intent was to show that somehow America was, inexorably on the decline, he presented all sorts of figures and so on, um, and as the balance of trade and so on. But the point is that while America probably is on an arc of decline, it just so happened that it was the Soviet Union and that really collapsed at that very moment when his book made its mark. So it's a good read. There's a lot of interesting things in there, but it's a product of its time. Now, your second point about could you recommend some books for us to read? Then I have to say you need to join our locals board, which is thegaggle.locals.com. I'll say it again, thegaggle.locals.com, where we have a book club. And once a week or once every 2 weeks, I recommend a book. Not only do I recommend a book, I post the PDF of the book, and they're always very good books. Incidentally, I never recommend anything crappy. So I post the PDF of a book. I provide a short introduction. So if you want my book recommendations, please join our locals community, thegaggle.locals.com, and you'll get my book recommendation, you get my short introduction, and you get the PDF of the book. I mean, that's a real bargain. So that's if you want all of that. Now, Peter Kovich says, would you call the Bolshevik Revolution a color revolution? Um, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I tend to think of color revolutions as being wholly sponsored from abroad, and the Bolshevik Revolution was, to a certain extent, sponsored from abroad, particularly from Imperial Germany. But that wasn't really the key um, part of it. That didn't play the key role in what happened in Russia. I mean, obviously the Germans wanted Lenin to seize power and then to take Russia out of the war, which of course he did. But they didn't want any the rest of it. I mean, they just wanted this very limited goal, which is to take Russia out of the war. And then Germany, as Germany planned, that they would win this war, and once they won the war, they would of course remove Lenin from power and put in somebody else, a much more pliant um, client in power. But that didn't happen, and so in terms of who were the key players in 1917, I mean, you had to say the Germans were backing Lenin, but the British and the French were backing Kerensky. They wanted Kerensky, but they thought Kerensky would pursue the war more vigorously and more effectively than Tsar Nicholas did. Of course, it turned into an absolute disaster as they pushed, because the British and the French pushed Kerensky to you know, escalate the Russian involvement in the war, and that, of course, led to a total calamity because, of course, the Russians really didn't want to go on fighting, and that very push to go on fighting, which the British, the French, with Kerensky, led to Lenin's seizure of power in November of that year. So it was after the complete debacle of the Russian military offensive of the summer of 2017, of not 2017, of 1917. Because of that, that's how Lenin was able to seize power. So the British and the French were certainly not supporting Lenin. The Germans were. The Germans had their own reasons for doing so. So that's why I don't really see it as as a color revolution. I mean, I guess the early part of it, which was uh, the kind of the liberal phase of it, the Kerensky part of it, you could say that may have some resemblance to a color revolution, but yeah, but not the later part, not the actual Bolshevik seizure of power. So yeah, with the British and the French, they thought, hey, this, we'll now have a better, stronger partner, and that's all they were thinking about. They wanted Russia to fight more effectively and to lift the burden off the Western powers on the Western front. So and so by doing so, they of course completely undermined the Kerensky regime. So yeah, Peter Kovic says, yeah, you don't see it as on. Yeah, I don't see it. It doesn't quite fit the mold. Marty has joined us, and Marty has provided us with a picture, with a nice picture. And this is a picture. Wow, that's as gruesome a picture as I've ever seen. That's a picture of Zelensky and Mark Rutte laughing uproariously over something or other. I have no idea what they're laughing about, and I don't really want to know. But that looks horrible. I mean, that's you know, Marty always offers us these really truly grotesque photographs, but you've outdone yourself this time. I haven't seen this picture. I guess it's from today. That looks horrific. But thank you so much, Marty. So a couple of things I want to talk about. So first of all, today we're talking about something rather odd, namely the Trump Gaza peace plan, which is kind of odd because up until now, Trump had completely identified himself with the cause of Netanyahu, and there didn't seem to be any particular reason for why Trump would want to start to sit down with the Arab leaders and come up with some kind of a Gaza peace plan. But nonetheless, apparently Trump has now uh, uh, put forward a peace plan, been presented to various Arab countries in New York, and they seemed quite positive about it. Now, again, you wouldn't quite have expected it going by the news conference that Trump had with Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday. Let's just watch a little bit of that exchange between Trump and Macron. Um, let's see. This was in the on the sidelines of the UN on Tuesday. So
their hostages back. We've gotten all of the American hostages, as you know, and Alexander, all of them have been back. Steve Witkoff's done a great job, and Marco always, and everybody. I mean, we have Scott got involved and strongly involved from a financial standpoint. We're doing some things that are pretty good. We put Iran out of commission, very important. That was called the bully of the Middle East, and they're out of commission. Now we're going to have a meeting today. I think it's going to be a successful meeting with all of the leaders of many of the biggest, I would say, the most important countries having to do with Gaza, indirectly and directly. And that's going to take place just in a little while. So I'm sure you'll be there, and we could have an outcome very quickly.
Why is your repudiation of Palestine as a gift to Hamas?
Well, I think it honors Hamas, and you can't do that because of October 7th. You just can't do that. But we want our hostages back, and we don't want them back in ones and twos and take the next 2 years to do it. We were the ones that got the hostages back, and I always said, I told Steve, I told Marco, I was always saying the last hostages are going to be the toughest ones. But you can't honor them by doing anything like you suggest. All you can do is say, we want our hostages back, and we want the war to end. We're going to want it to end. But you always have to remember, people forget October 7th was one of the most savage days in the history of the world. There's never been anything like that. We're talking about babies being sliced in half. You're talking about young children having their heads chopped off. You can't forget that.
Would you recognize Palestine?
So here, he's just repeating this mindless, ridiculous, idiotic mantra about chopped up babies, heads sliced off, babies stuck in microwaves, and all of this. So he says this, and he often embellishes it by claiming that he has actually seen video footage of this. Which of course always raises the question when he says, "I've seen video footage of this," because we know no such events ever took place. So either he's lying, he's seen no such video footage, or, and I think this is where which I think more likely, that somebody is feeding him fake videos. Somebody being, all the various Israeli agents that surround Trump and feed him these fake videos, because there are no such videos of sliced babies. So, but again, he comes and just simply says this: October the 7th, which really doesn't get anywhere. And this is the point that I think Macron makes to him in this exchange, which is quite interesting. So let's continue with this.
And just perhaps to make it clear on that, I think it's why yesterday 11 countries did recognize Palestine. Not as, I mean, it was not a decision taken like that, neither by UK nor by Canada nor by France. It's just a big change. President Trump is totally right. Nobody forgets the 7th of October. I went there a few days after, taking families in my hands, and we experienced all together these horrific attacks. And by the way, we lost a lot of French people in these terrorist attacks. But after almost 2 years of war, what is the result? Once again, they killed the top leaders of Hamas. It works. This is a great achievement. But at the same time, you have as many Hamas fighters as you had the first day. So it doesn't work to dismantle the Hamas. This is not the right way to proceed. So we need a full-fledged process, and we worked very hard on the day after. And
So this is pretty strong statement by Macron, stronger than anything Starmer said, which is that, well, you know, you've got as many Hamas fighters now as you had on October the 7th. So what is Israel achieving? This war Israel is waging is not achieving its goals. That was an important point. That's a strong point against Trump.
I totally share this sequencing. The release of all hostages, the ceasefire, resume of humanitarian aid, the day after in Gaza to stabilize the land. And we need a political perspective. And this is why we took this decision on recognition.
Well, I have to say that I'm
Now listen to this. This is, you know, Trump's response. Trump's obviously fuming with these points that Macron has made, which is the perfectly correct point, which is what's October the 7th got to do with anything? I mean, that's now 2 years ago. Israel has not accomplished any of its goals in Gaza. Hamas is as strong today as it was 2 years ago. So we're not getting anywhere doing it this way. And now Trump chimes in. This is quite remarkable what he now says.
on the side of Israel. I've been on the side of Israel really my whole life. And
I'm on the side of Israel. I've been on the side of Israel all my life. That's a remarkable thing to say. I mean, you're the American president. You're supposed to be an even-handed. You're supposed to be a broker. And he himself, as I say, as I've said many times before, during the 2015-2016 campaign season, said that he was going to work out a deal, a great deal for both sides. Didn't say, I'm on Israel's side. But here he just blurts this out. I'm on Israel's side, and I've always been on Israel's side. Well, you know, then what are we talking about?
we are going to get a solution, and it's going to be a solution, hopefully, that's good for everybody. But it's time to stop. We're going to have that very important meeting. I think the meeting we have coming up in the next hour is going to be one of the most important meetings that we'll have here. And we've had some important meetings. We've had some great meetings, and I understand where you are and where other people are too. And we just have to get this solved. We have to get the hostages back. We want to get the war over. That's very important. We're going to end the war, get the hostages back, and we want them all back. We don't want to have one and then we'll give another two in about 3 months from now. We've been doing that for a long time. And in all fairness, we've gotten a lot of hostages back. But you have 20 hostages and you have probably 38 bodies, dead bodies. And the people that I see, and I speak to Israeli families. I was speaking to American families before, but we got them back. But I speak to Israeli families, and they want the son who died. They want their dead son back as much as though he were alive. And it's an amazing thing to see. And it's
All right, so you can see what he's doing here. He's saying that, well, we want the hostages back, okay? And then he says that, well, we want the war over. But it never really spells out, well, what do you mean by that? I mean, here Macron is presenting a plan. You know, that's a thing. You know, he and Saudi Arabia and everyone else voted on this a very, very detailed plan. But just simply saying, I want the war over, then do you mean ending it on Netanyahu's terms? And so when he says, I'm on Israel's side, and I've always been on Israel's side, and then he says, oh, but I want the war over, then it sounds like he is entirely embracing the Netanyahu's goals. And so what he means by ending the war coming to an end is when Israel has achieved everything that it desires, and presumably that is ridding Gaza of its Palestinian population, at the very least. That's, you know, leaving aside then the question of the West Bank. So that's why, you know, somebody says only Jewish lives matter to Trump. Yeah, that's exactly right. And and also kind of interesting where he keeps talking about our hostages. He's not referring to American hostages because the American hostages have all been released. So when he says our hostages, he's again doing this we and our and us with Israel, which he was doing at the time of the attack on Iran. Very, very obnoxious. So that's Trump at that with Macron. Really, I'm no fan of Macron to say the least, but you'd have to say in that meeting he was the one who was talking sense. So now he supposedly came up with a plan. There's a Trump peace plan for Gaza, and the media are reporting this dutifully about the Trump peace plan. So let's take a look as to what is in this Trump plan. And the most detailed description of this plan for Gaza is in Axios. And here we have Trump's Gaza peace plan gets support from regional leaders. And here's President Trump and White House envoy Steve Witkoff presented Arab and Muslim leaders with a 21-point plan for ending the war in Gaza and for post-Hamas governance on Tuesday, garnering positive responses from the attendees. It's the first time Trump has presented a U.S. plan for ending the war in Gaza, and then on Wednesday, several leaders issued statements praising it. Trump told the leaders at the meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly that the war must end urgently. Trump noted that he's presenting the plan because every day the war continues, Israel becomes more and more isolated internationally. Which that's not the thrust of what he was saying with Macron. He was just saying October the 7th. We can't forget that. We can't recognize a Palestinian state because that's rewarding Hamas. And we got to get the hostages out. There was no talk there at all for any kind of a detailed plan. And so the main principles of this plan are: one, the release of all remaining hostages; two, a permanent ceasefire; three, gradual Israeli withdrawal from all of the Gaza Strip. That's permanent ceasefire, gradual Israeli withdrawal. Okay. A post-war plan that includes a governing mechanism in Gaza without Hamas, and a security force that would include Palestinians, but also soldiers from Arab and Muslim countries, funding from Arab and Muslim countries for the new administration in Gaza, and for reconstruction of the enclave. So he's going to stick the Arab and Muslim countries with the bill for the reconstruction. Nice. So Israel destroys Gaza. I don't know how many millions and millions of tons of rubble that's now litters Gaza. And then the Arab and Muslim countries need to pony up, the money for the reconstruction. That's a good deal. Some involvement of the Palestinian Authority, some involvement. And then the sources noted that Trump asked the Arab and Muslim leaders for their support of these principles and their commitment to take part in the post-war plan for Gaza. The meeting was attended by leaders and senior officials from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, and Pakistan. According to two sources, the Arab leaders presented Trump with several conditions for supporting his plan. Now, these are the conditions that they said we will support as long as: one, Israel will not annex parts of the West Bank or Gaza; Israel will not occupy parts of Gaza; Israel will not build settlements in Gaza; Israel will stop undermining the status quo at the Al-Aqsa Mosque; humanitarian aid to Gaza will immediately increase. Trump made it clear to the Arab and Muslim leaders that he would not allow Israel to annex parts of the West Bank. Politico reported first on Trump's pledge to prevent annexation. At the end of the meeting, Arab and Muslim leaders expressed support for the American principles and committed to taking part in the post-war plan. In a joint statement on Wednesday, the leaders of 7 Arab and Muslim countries that attended the summit expressed support for Trump's plan. We reaffirm our commitment to cooperate with President Trump and emphasize the importance of his leadership in order to end the war, and so on. And then CC issued a separate statement in support of the plan. I appreciate the efforts of President Trump to stop the ongoing war in Gaza Strip and his pursuit of peace in the Middle East at large. I value the proposals he presented, and so on. One Arab official who attended the meeting said it was clear it was very good and stressed Trump is definitely committed to ending the war. Another Arab official said the participants left the meeting very hopeful. For the first time, we felt there was a serious plan on the table. President Trump wants this chapter to be over so that we can move forward to better things in the region. And then Trump told the Arab leaders that the next step is to discuss the plan with Netanyahu at the White House on Monday. So Netanyahu is coming to, I think he's already in New York, and he's going to address the UN General Assembly tomorrow. It's on Friday. So now Trump has to clear this plan with Netanyahu at the White House on Monday. And then here's an Arab official. The U.S. outline was good, but needed a bit more refining with input from Arab countries. After it is finalized, the U.S. will have to sell it to Bibi. Yeah. And then here's Politico, which makes clear that that's the condition of the Arab states, that Trump will not let Israel annex the West Bank. President Trump promised Arab and Muslim leaders during a meeting on Tuesday that he would not allow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to annex the West Bank. Two of the people, 6 people familiar with that, said that Trump was firm on the topic and that the president promised that Israel would not be allowed to absorb the West Bank, which is governed by the Palestinian Authority. Another one of the people familiar with the talks noted that despite Trump's assurance, a ceasefire to end Israel's nearly 2-year war against Hamas was nowhere close to fruition. 2 others familiar with the matter said Trump and his team presented a white paper outlining the administration's plan to end the war, including the annexation promise and other details such as governance and post-war security. And then New York Times also, he assures Arab leaders there no West Bank annexation. All right, so we're getting the sense now. There's no plans for a ceasefire. So that's right at the end, in that article in Politico, somebody blurts this out. Yeah, but there's no plans for a ceasefire. There's vague talk about a future governance and whatever, reconstruction and so on, but there's no plans for a ceasefire. And the other thing is that it has to be cleared with Netanyahu, because if Netanyahu is not interested in this plan, and he's not interested in this plan, then Netanyahu has no incentive to stop. The only incentive Netanyahu would have to stop would be if Trump were to apply serious pressure on Israel, which Trump is not going to do. And that's why, it was interesting to listen to in that short presser with Macron when Trump said, I'm on Israel's side, and I've always been on Israel's side. So if he's on Israel's side, why would he apply any kind of pressure on Netanyahu? In fact, if you put forward this peace plan, this acts as an absolute disincentive for Netanyahu to bring this war to an end. Because if he brings this war to an end, then this peace plan goes into effect, some kind of international governance of Gaza and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And the commitment that he doesn't annex the West Bank. Now, the other problem is this: that even if you start negotiations, and if Netanyahu says, "Yeah, fine, we'll start negotiations," we know how Israel treats its negotiators. Who's going to sit them down and we're going to with these negotiations with Israel when we could just simply get killed? Well, let's sit down and study the Trump 21-point peace plan. 21-point peace plan, and in the meantime, an Israeli rocket blows everyone up who's studying the 21-point peace plan. So this really is just fantasy work, because if Netanyahu, we've got to clear it with Netanyahu. Well, you can't clear it with Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not going to accept it. We know this. There's nothing to discuss. He's not going to accept this. And even if he were to say, let's negotiate, then whoever is negotiating, that's as much as his life is worth. I mean, Israel has shown. I mean, they're ready to strike inside Qatar, an American ally inside Qatar, against the Hamas leaders. So, of course, any discussion of the Trump peace plan by anyone there is, is a kind of a life-threatening experience, because at any moment you could be killed by Israeli rockets. So it's a sort of a kind of a fantasy world, and it's always going to be a fantasy world as long as Trump doesn't address the real problem here, and it's always been the real problem in the Middle East, which is Israel's absolute refusal to come to any kind of a reasonable settlement, and Israel's willingness to destroy and kill everyone who stands in its way. And as long as the United States continues to underwrite this and said, fine, I'm on Israel's side. I've always been on Israel's side. Then of course, you can put forward all of your peace plans. 21 point peace plan. I think the French plan was about 42 points. You can keep doing it. You can go on recognizing the state of Palestine, but none of that is going to make any difference as long as Israel is allowed to do whatever it wants to do, and the United States underwrites it. And there's nothing that Trump has said, Tuesday, Wednesday, today, that suggests that he is willing to apply any pressure against Netanyahu, because the moment he opens his mouth, he's still talking about October the 7th, babies being sliced up, babies' heads cut off, and so on. So I think the Trump peace plan is for the birds. I think the meeting with Netanyahu on Monday will be as meaningless as all of his other meetings with Netanyahu, when like the one that they had, talking about Iran, which was only laying the foundations for the attack, a completely unprovoked unilateral attack on Iran, and then all the previous peace plans that we got ceasefire plans for Gaza, which of course Netanyahu rejected. So some Luna Dizol says there shall be no Palestine, says Netanyahu. Yeah, Netanyahu said this the other day. Nope, there'll be no Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. That's it. That's it. That's his position. Now, to be fair, this peace plan, the Trump peace plan, doesn't promise any kind of a Palestinian state. That's not part of the peace plan. This is a peace plan for a solution in Gaza, somehow to bring the war in Gaza to an end. There's absolutely no talk here of a Palestinian state. But as I said, there's no indication at all that Israel has the slightest interest in engaging with this. So now that was that. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is, I talked a little bit about it in yesterday's uh, podcast, which was the Trump's where the his odd um, truth that he sent out uh, the other day, which appeared to go against everything that he had said on on the war in Ukraine. So all of this time, as I said, Trump's position has been this is a really stupid war. It should never have happened. It wouldn't have happened had I been president. But above all, he was saying that this is absolutely crazy for Biden and Zelensky to start a war against a power that is much stronger, namely Russia. Russia is 5 times the size of Ukraine. It is really quite ridiculous to wage a completely hopeless war that can only have one outcome. And then, of course, he repeated that a number of times, including during his the meeting in the Oval Office in February, which when Trump told him, "You don't have any cards to play." And that's been Trump's point. Trump, this is a war that should never have happened, and it needs to come to an end before Ukraine loses ever more territory. But now he then sent out this truth, which went against that, in which he seemed to suggest that this is a war Ukraine could win, and hey, go for it. So let's just take a look at this at this truth that he sent out. So here it is. After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing for Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. So this is already quite extraordinary because, I mean, as I say, first of all, obviously, he's going back on the position he's taken, which is that this is a war Ukraine cannot win because Russia is just much bigger and stronger. But he's doing something quite drastic here because Biden never said Ukraine is a position to win back the country in its original form. In other words, Ukraine is capable of going back to the Ukraine within the 1991 borders. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. So now he says it a second time. So he says it in the opening sentence. Now he says it again. So just to make sure that there's no ambiguity. He says, yes, Ukraine within its 1991 borders. In other words, Ukraine is capable of driving the Russians out of the Donbass. I mean, it controls 98% of Lugansk, 70% of Donetsk, 70% of Kherson, 70% of Zaporozhye. So all of that Ukraine can achieve, can push the Russians out. And of course, Russia controls 100% of Crimea. And Crimea too, 1991 borders. Why not, he says. Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. The I mean, some people have been speculating that Trump may not have written this himself because the expression paper tiger really isn't part of his lexicon. He's never used that term before. And the construction here, the sentence construction here, isn't exactly Trumpian. The sentences are longer and more elaborate. Trump doesn't usually write like that. His sentences are usually very short and very much very, very aggressive and pugnacious, and he doesn't go in for elaborately constructed sentences as these are. But anyway, I mean, it obviously came out under his name, so whoever wrote it had to have Trump had to have signed off on it. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which is great spirit and only getting better, Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. So that's a very, very long sentence. And as I said, Trump doesn't write long sentences. He's a short sentence person, and quite an elaborately constructed sentence. So it certainly doesn't sound like him. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. So now this is the odd part of it, is when he says, in any event, I wish both countries well. I mean, what does that even mean? We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. And then if you go back again to another key sentence, he said, when we win all of Ukraine back with time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. And then, in any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Good luck to all. Have at it, boys. So that's very, very odd. Now, I think it's a reasonable interpretation. So Summer Petro says, paper tiger, is this not a nod to China and Chairman Mao? Yeah, he was the one who coined that about the paper tiger. Whom did he call a paper? I'm trying to think whom he called this paper tiger. Maybe it was about the Americans. Maybe he referred to the Americans when he said that about paper tiger. But I remember in the 67 war, just as the Israelis were gloating about their great victory, and then Moshe Dayan, somebody asked Moshe Dayan, President Nasser, Egypt President Nasser said this and this, and then Dayan said, I think Nasser is a paper tiger, and of course everyone was delighted by it. That was in the heyday. Everyone loved Israel after the 67 war, and so that was so funny for Netanyahu to refer to Nasser as a paper tiger. But yeah, that's why it's a very odd for Trump to come up with this phrase. Where did he? I mean, it's not used very much. Where would he have heard this expression? And as I say, the sentence construction is not Trumpian. These sentences are very quite elaborately constructed. But nonetheless, he's saying that William said, "Oh, good luck to all. Have fun, enjoy yourselves. I wish everyone well, and we will just go on supplying arms." But of course, there's a bit of inconsistency there, because if he's going to say, "Well, good luck to all, have at it, boys, and enjoy yourself, then provide arms to both sides. Give some arms to Russia, give some arms to Ukraine. I mean, hey, why not? But he's saying, no, I'm only going to provide arms to Ukraine. So basically, you are taking sides. It's not a. Ahmadovich says correct grammar, not Trump. No, that's right. This was the grammar is quite elaborate here. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's still quite a complex sentence structure there. I mean, it's somebody who knows how to write, who can craft long sentences. I don't think he didn't write that, but nonetheless, that's his the thrust there is have at it. The Europeans are going to do it. We will provide the arms, and we'll give the arms to NATO, and the NATO can do whatever they want with it. The problem is that I think that's what people are taking heart from that. They say, oh well, he's just basically washing his hands of Ukraine. I don't believe it. I'm not buying that thesis, because it's not in Trump's nature to wash his hands of anything. I mean, Trump is somebody who always wants to be in everything. Whatever's going on, he always wants to be in it. Wants to be the central player. To wash your hands of it means, well, that's it. I want to talk about other things. That's just not Trump. So he's not washing his hands of anything. Now, he may not provide all of the arms and finances that NATO would like, and Ukraine would like, EU would like. That may be true, but he's not washing his hands of anything. Now, the problem with this this truth that he sends out is that it means the war goes on. He continues with this war, that he that there's no end to this, because he's now encouraging all of the NATO powers, all of the coalition of the Willings, all the Starmers and Macrons and everyone else. Hey, Trump, we've got Trump. He's basically on our side. We just got to get him, a little bit, push him a little bit more, and he's going to be wholly on our side. We just got to provide some more incentives. But look how far he's moved from where he was it was the end of last year. He's now pretty much with us. So therefore, all he's done here, whether all the talk, he's washing his hands off, he's basically encouraging NATO to get Trump more actively involved. Hence, all of the sudden hysteria about Russian violations of NATO airspace. That's the sort of the big buzz talk. Oh, Russia's violating NATO. Oh, Russia. So and then Trump foolishly said on Tuesday that if Russia violates NATO airspace, then NATO should just shoot down the Russian aircraft. That's a serious step. And Trump should know that, if this escalates, it's the United States that's on the line. The United States is the only serious military power in NATO. The Estonia, Poland, or Germany, or Denmark, they can't fight Russia. The United States would have to fight Russia. So when Trump sends out these kinds of truths, he is encouraging essentially the Europeans and, of course, Zelensky in thinking that we're now very close to getting what we wanted. What we wanted all along was active, direct U.S. military involvement in Ukraine. And we're almost there. So I'm not buying the thesis that somehow, he's washing his hands of it. He's just handing it over to the Europeans. No, that's but as I say, I don't think Trump he's not a hand washer sort of person. He wants to be involved in everything. And he has now accepted a cardinal premise of NATO, which is, hey, we're winning this war. We can win this war. We can get back to Ukraine in the 1991 borders. Russia's weak. Russia's really weak. We can do all this. So that encourages either a false flag attack or some incident in which Russian military aircraft is shot down. So I think it's a very a dangerous step that Trump has taken, whoever is behind this. Now, we know that Keith Kellogg has been blustering now for several weeks about how weak Russia is. Russia's losing this war. Ukraine's winning. If there were a war between Russia and the United States would kick Russia's ass. I mean, he's been talking like this. So Kellogg may well be behind this. Kellogg should have obviously been put out to pasture some time ago, but he's still there and exerting, I think, a kind of malevolent influence on Trump. So yeah. Now, I also wanted to say something about the Moldova, which is again, there's always hysteria about Moldova. There's always an election in Moldova, and the NATO EU gang are always terrified that they're going to lose because their creature Maya Sandu is very unpopular, and so we get this hysteria regularly about this list, that the Russians are about to steal an election in Moldova. Now, and these stories are now reaching fever pitch, and it's quite extraordinary. Well, it isn't really extraordinary. It's actually par for the course. But the way the media simply regurgitate these absolutely ludicrous stories without the slightest critical insights. Just simply, hey, they just believe anything. So here's just a small sampling of just what's in the media on this Moldova election. So here was Maya Sandu. She was speaking at the European Parliament, and she does her usual thing. Parliament, the election on the 28th of September, that's this Sunday, most consequential in its history, and the outcome would decide whether we consolidate as a stable democracy or whether Russia pulls us away from Europe, turning Moldova into a threat on Europe's eastern frontier. She outlined that Moldova's lesson and its warning is that if our democracy cannot be protected, then no democracy in Europe is safe. So always this apocalyptic presentations. With the Moldovan parliamentary elections approaching, President Sandu also talked about Moscow's unlimited hybrid war on a scale unseen before the full invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin's goal is clear, she said, to capture Moldova through the ballot box, to use us against Ukraine and to turn us into a launch pad for hybrid attacks on the European Union. It's always very interesting. I mean, it's all this apocalyptic talk, and then you think, well, okay, if you're so fantastic, if you stand for everything that's true and good and beautiful in this world, and Russia stands for everything that's evil and malign and fraudulent in this world, why are you always in danger of losing an election? I mean, you're always about to lose. And then this is why this election is very important. By defending it, we protect not only Moldova, but also regional security and stability. Moldova may be the testing ground, but Europe is the target. The Moldovan president concluded by saying that Europe has endured by adapting, rebuilding, and turning fragility into strength, and so on. And then, so here is the BBC. Again, boom. Here's the headline: Kremlin threatening Moldova's independence. President warns ahead of key vote. And then we have the usual rubbish from Sandu. And then just days before Sunday's pivotal parliamentary elections, Moldovan police say that they had confiscated weapons and explosives in raids across the country. Weapons and, amazing. Weapons and explosives. So you talk about there's an election here, and now, you're afraid that you're going to lose through the ballot box, but now it's weapons and explosives. They allege some of the 74 detainees had traveled to Serbia. That's good. Always bring in the Serbs. For training by Russian instructors, including with firearms. I mean, can you imagine the nonsense here that they go to Serbia, and which incidentally isn't particularly close to Moldova. So, and there they're going to have training by Russian instructors, including with firearms. To do what exactly? Addressing the nation, President Sandu accused the Kremlin of pouring hundreds of millions of euros into Moldova. Hundreds of millions. That's a piss load of money. I'm not sure Russia has that kind of money. In an attempt to foment violence and spread disinformation and fear. So foment violence, weapons, explosive, and we have disinformation and fear. The Kremlin believes that we are all for sale, that we are too small to resist, that we are not a country, only a territory. The president declared, pointing to Russian involvement at the highest level, but Moldova is our home, and our home is not for sale. And pro-Russia parties have accused Sandu of trying to intimidate them and sway the vote. That's the kind of a throwaway BBC line. Well, pro-Russian parties have accused them. Of course, they're not pro-Russian. I mean, again, this is just lazy journalist speak. Pro-Russian. Sandu also called on supporters to come out and cast their ballots on Sunday in an election in which pro-Russian forces are set to shake the pro-EU status quo. The majority held by Sandu's own party of Action Solidarity is seen at risk. Russia's SVR, Foreign Intelligence Service, has now issued its own statement, deliberately mirroring what was said by Moldova. It claims that European countries themselves are plotting the blatant falsification of the result on Sunday in order to provoke protests. The SVR even warns that the EU could mount an armed incursion and de facto occupation of Moldova, falsely claiming that the EU is deploying troops. How do they know? I mean, you always wonder whenever media say falsely claiming, how do they know that this is false? How do we know what the EU is planning? And then here's Bloomberg. Revealed Putin's secret plan to hack Moldova's pivotal election. Documents seen by Bloomberg show that tactics include recruitment of Moldovan voters abroad, organizing protests, and a disinformation campaign. Russia has devised a plan to intervene in elections in Moldova and disrupt the government's efforts to keep the country on the path toward European Union. So the tactics such as recruitment of Moldovans abroad to vote. Now, I don't understand, why is that bad? I mean, if they're Moldovans and they're abroad and they're entitled to vote, then why is it bad to recruit Moldovans abroad to vote? Particularly as that's exactly what the Europeans have been doing by, essentially getting every single Moldovan in the Moldovan diaspora in Europe to the polling places, which is what they did in the presidential election. They had I don't know how many polling places littered throughout Europe to make sure that no one had to travel more than a mile to get cast his vote. Whereas, of course, the Moldovan diaspora that lived in Russia weren't able to vote. There were only 2 polling places in Moscow, only 2, even though there's a large Moldovan diaspora in Russia. And at each of the polling places, there were only 5,000 ballots. So only 10,000 Moldovans were able to vote in Russia. But now they're saying this is absolutely outrageous that Moldovans abroad are being recruited to vote. How do they know that these people who are being recruited to vote are going to vote for the pro-Russian parties? I mean, it's like none of it really makes very sense. But apparently, there's no evil that the Russians will not resort to. The goal of the plan is to undermine the chances of President Maya Sandu's Party of Action, Solidarity, and ultimately see her removed from power, according to documents citing the internal Russian plan. Now, right away, whenever you read stuff like this, the obvious question that rises is, where did these documents come from? You say Bloomberg saw these documents. Okay, Bloomberg saw these documents. Who gave you these documents? Well, obviously, the intelligence services, probably the Moldovan intelligence services, but I'm sure the intelligence services, well, let's see, MI6, the intelligence services of France, Germany, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. They provide you with this intelligence. Oh, these are Bloomberg. We looked at the documents. We looked at they tell us that the Russians are trying to steal this election in Moldova. We looked at the documents. They just provided us with the documents. So absolutely, totally uncritical. Imagine, you come in like a complete idiot. You get MI6 is providing you with these documents. And you say, oh, well, wow, I didn't know the Russians were this bad. Anyway, let's go on with this. And here, this Bloomberg, Russia has devised a plan to intervene in elections in Moldova and disrupt the government's efforts to keep the country in the path towards European Union membership. They all have this formulation. They stick with this formula. Moldova is on the path towards European Union membership. Moldova is on the path toward European Union membership. Well, is it? I'm not at all sure it is. It's an extremely poor country. The level of corruption is horrific, and Hungary for one, and I'm sure other countries are going to raise all sorts of issues about Moldova's suitability to be a member of the EU, particularly when it has a region, Transnistria, that wants nothing to do with the European Union. This problem of Transnistria, Moldova has no means of resolving. The EU doesn't know how to resolve it. And then, of course, there's other regions like Gagauzia, which also doesn't want to have anything to do with the European Union. So clearly, Moldova is a very divided country and eminently unsuitable to join the EU. But the media discussed on the path toward European Union membership. The multi-pronged strategy, we're back to the Russians' multi-pronged strategy, was finalized in spring and coordinated directly by the Kremlin. So the Kremlin was involved. They got a lot of things on their minds, but even so, there's always a little bit of time to deal with the Moldova problem. And then he goes on. Tactics include recruitment of Moldovans abroad, including Russia, to vote at polling stations in the EU and elsewhere. But it's like, well, it's okay for Moldovans to vote in the EU, the ones who are living in France or Italy. That's fine. as long as they vote for Maya Sandu. But if these Moldovans are not going to vote for Maya Sandu, then they have no right to vote. It's outrageous. You can't go around voting if you're not going to vote the right way. And deploying others to stage disruptive protests and a widespread disinformation campaign on social media. So, that's another thing. We obviously can't have people exchanging comments, ideas, whatever on social media if they're against Maya Sandu. So it becomes a disinformation campaign that needs to be under control. Another core area of the plans by President Vladimir Putin's executive office involves use of compromising material to pressure public officials to disrupt the electoral process. Ooh, compromising material. Bloomberg was unable to confirm whether Russia was implementing the plans as the election campaign in Moldova culminates this week. Two European government officials familiar with the matter, though, said he was almost certain that it intended to follow through with most of them. Okay, so here are the plans, but they say we can't really confirm whether Russia is actually implementing the plans. But two European government officials said, yeah, they're going ahead and implementing them. That's this is what I love. Good journalism. Where journalists happy to act as conduits for intelligence and for government official. Moldovan police, meanwhile, have been cracking down on disinformation campaigns. Well, that's good. Disinformation campaigns. In other words, they're cracking down on free speech, or speech. Again, media report this without anything. Hey, we're in the media. We shouldn't really be supporting any kind of crackdown on the free exchange of ideas. No, but instead, they're cracking down on disinformation campaigns and attempts to buy votes. This is always a classic, but they're buying votes. And then last month, authorities officially asked to block 443 TikTok channels in the name of democracy. And then on Monday, officers mounted an operation against what they said was a Russian-backed plot to destabilize the election. Authorities in Chisinau detained 74 people and conducted more than 250 searches across the country, dismantling a network allegedly run with support from the GRU. All of it without any critical attitudes at all. And then here's Radio Free Europe, brought to you courtesy of U.S. taxpayers. EU monitoring threats to Moldova's elections amid alleged Russian plot to train provocateurs in Serbia. The European Commission is investigating Russia's alleged influence on Moldova's parliamentary election, including training Moldovans in destabilization tactics in Serbia. God. Moldovan authority. So anyway, the EU has deployed its first hybrid rapid response team to assist Moldova in plans to enhance measures against disinformation with a new program for media resilience. Now, that isn't interference in an election. Read that again. The EU has deployed its first hybrid rapid response team to assist Moldova and plans to enhance measures against disinformation with a new program for media resilience. Total interference in the election, but that doesn't count because only Russia interferes. The European Commission is aware of Russia's attempts to influence Moldova's September the 28th parliamentary election and is examining how it was possible that dozens of Moldovans were reportedly trained in Serbia in destabilization tactics. How it was possible? Well, maybe because it never happened. But how do we know about this? Well, Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koch told Radio Free Europe. Speaking to Radio Free Europe, Koch, so this is the European Enlargement Commissioner, praised the Moldovan government for uncovering the alleged plan, saying that it has proven to be resilient. Notice how this word resilient keeps coming along. Always watch out for the words, the buzzwords that they repeat. Resilient, capable of fighting back the forces that would like to see this country going away from the European path. Again, same mantra. And then so investigators say that between June and September, groups of Moldovans aged 19 to 45 traveled to Serbia, where Russian instructors taught them how to break through police cordons, resist security forces, and use rubber batons, handcuffs, and even firearms. So therefore, you could, if there's the use of violence, which is quite possible by the Moldovan government on Sunday, because the election will be stolen outright, just like the election of Maya Sandu was stolen absolutely in plain sight, just like the election in Romania stolen in plain sight. Just in case there are protesters, I mean, which is what the EU is expecting, that there will be some protesters at this outright theft of an election, then they can say, oh, well, the protesters were all trained by Russia in Serbia. So they can take a whack at Serbia as well for taking part in this training. Some reportedly entered Serbia under the guise of pilgrims to Orthodox churches, only to be recruited for training in exchange for 400 euros per trip. Moldovan officials said many detainees were cooperating with investigators, well, of course, because they were the investigators, and that prosecutors will seek arrest warrants for at least 12 suspects, while others are expected to be released. As part of the probe, passports, foreign banks, SIM card, blah, blah, were seized during 250 searches. Serbian authorities have not yet responded to a Radio Free Europe request to comment on the findings of the Moldovan investigation. So this is absolutely ludicrous stories. But you can see right away what's going on here. The Moldovan election will be absolutely stolen. Maya Sandu is very unpopular. Her party would lose otherwise. She lost the election, of course, but was clearly stolen. And they're obviously worried that there will be protests. I mean, it's understandable that people will get a little angry by these elections being repeatedly stolen. But the thing is that this is now becoming the norm in Euroland, which is the theft of election. And each time they do it in a different way. In Romania, they did it in a different way. They just prevented the guy who was on the brink of winning. They just basically canceled the election. Well, that's that. Canceled the election, and then they prevented him from running for when the election was rerun. That's Calin Georgescu. So that's that. And now, in France, you've got Marine Le Pen, who's, as things stand, is banned from running in the 2027 presidential election. And Germany is now stepping up to the plate. So you remember in Germany, you had that, what's the thing called? The Office for the Protection of the Constitution. I think Verfassungsschutzamt, or I think that's Verfassungsschutzamt, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution. And they declared that the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland Party, is a threat to the Constitution. It doesn't really explain why they're a threat. After all, if they were threatening violence, or they use violence, they ever use violence, and that would be very easy. You just simply arrest them and do whatever you need to do. So it's all just made up that they're a threat to the Constitution. So by doing that, they were, of course, laying the groundwork for eventually banning the AFD. But there's some local election boards have kind of jumped the gun and already just outright banning the AFD. So in Ludwigshafen, the mayoral candidate, who was a member of the Alternative for Deutschland, he was just simply, boom, prevented from running. That's it. Boom, he's gone because he's a member of the AFD. Therefore, he's a threat to the Constitution. So here is the story from kind of the Brussels Signal, and it says here, voter turnout plummets in German city after ban on AFD candidate. This is Ludwigshafen. And it says voter turnout plummeted to just 29% in the mayoral election in Ludwigshafen, an industrial city in southwestern Germany. Many inhabitants apparently chose to boycott the ballot yesterday, following the ban of the mayoral candidate of the right-wing Alternative for Germany party shortly before the vote. Out of an electorate of more than 118,000 people, only 34,631 votes, or 29.3%, cast their vote, compared to a turnout of 60.2% in the election in 2017. And then, in addition, the official count of the city of Ludwigshafen lists 3,201 votes, invalid votes, or 9.2% of the total number of votes. The election had gained notoriety beforehand after the AFD candidate, Joachim Pohl, on August the 5th, had been banned from running 7 weeks before the election. Local newspaper Rheinpfalz reported yesterday that many AFD supporters had written Pohl's name on their ballots, even though this rendered them invalid. Pohl himself told the press agency DPA he would challenge the election in court, saying, we are determined to contest the election, whether this will be after the first round or after the runoff. My lawyers will have to clarify. And then in the first round, conservative candidate from CDU got 41%. The Social Democrat came in second with 35%, and then so the Bletner and Gotter, just, I mean, it really is like Tweedledee and Tweedledum will now face each other in the runoff ballot. And then Bletner told Welt TV he was surprised about the low turnout. Well, he was surprised. Damn. Yeah, that was very surprising. I wonder why there's a low turnout. When you get, one candidate is just simply taken off the ballot. And then you think voters might be a little pissed off by this. He surmised it was due to the fact that the mayoral election did not coincide with any state or federal elections this time. I'm sure that's how he surmised it. Well, that's why we got a low ballot. Yeah, because there was no other election taking place at this time. A standalone mayoral election, that was the first Ludwigshafen. I believe that this, combined with the Joachim Pohl affair, led to the low voter turnout. Pohl had been excluded by an election committee manned by his political opponents. The committee members voted with a 6-1 majority that Pohl should not be allowed to run, as he lacked constitutional loyalty. That's it. He was not loyal to the Constitution. Committee members said they had followed recommendations from the administration of the state of Rhineland-Palatinate, including the state interior ministry in Mainz. The ministry, run by a social democrat, had compiled a list of reasons for recommending Pohl's exclusion. They included the fact that he had commended the oeuvre of British fantasy author Tolkien, specifically the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as especially valuable for modern conservatism. And Paul had appealed the committee's decision in several courts. Judges upheld the decision before the election. Of course they did. A suit in front of the German Federal Constitutional Court is still ongoing. A ban of the AfD candidates has even made headlines overseas, with Paul joining an AfD delegation on an invitation to the White House. So you get the drift there, that basically this is what they're going to do to the AfD. They're just going to basically ban them by saying, well, they're not loyal to the Constitution. So if you're not loyal to the Constitution, then you can't run. And you know, it's very much now a pattern in Europe, which is that anyone who doesn't follow the agenda, well, we're just going to find some way to prevent him from running because he might win. That's the thing. Now, it's very interesting that this was really devised. This method was really devised in the United States. I mean, remember, this is what they tried to do to Trump. Remember, they said Trump was had mounted an insurrection on January the 6th. Therefore, he was in violation of the Constitution. He was in violation of the 14th Amendment. Therefore, he should be taken off the ballot. And they tried to do that. They tried to do it. They did that in Colorado. And I think it was Maine that they did that. And then it was went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said you can't just simply start taking people off the ballot on any state-by-state basis. The said, I mean, in theory, Congress could pass legislation saying, whatever, that somehow an insurrection should be taken off the ballot, but you can't do it on a state-by-state basis. So that was an important ruling in the United States, and you'd have to say it's a close-run thing, because remember that if that's had some other people on that constitutional on the Supreme Court in the United States, that vote could have gone in a very different direction. But in Europe, they're really now they're very excited about the possibility of just simply canceling elections that you're going to lose. And so anyway, let's take a look at our locals page, see if what are the members of our locals community are saying. These are the people who make sure that the dogs are kept, reasonably contented. They're not reasonably content because they're not content with me, but they at least they get something just to tie them over. So really appreciate our locals community. The pride of place goes to some Marty's picture of Mark Rutte and Zelensky. Anyway, the first question is from Cynthia, and Cynthia says, this is a question from Cynthia. But before I read, always I need to remind Gagglers, that Cynthia is our resident film scholar, film expert, who provides the Gaggle with a very learned and informative commentary on the history and background of the films that we screen every week on Monday night at the movies. So we screen very, very good movies, really among the best. And so always, it's there on our locals board. That's why I encourage everybody to join our locals community. So it's on our locals board. So watch the film, but it goes with the membership, and above all, read Cynthia's really, really interesting commentary. Because I always learn so much more from it. things, lots of stuff that I just simply had no idea of. Anyway, Cynthia asks, what do you think of Gillian Michaels having a massive meltdown and subsequently storming off the set of her own show, Her Take, after a co-host brought up Charlie Kirk being offered money from Israel? And do you anticipate this type of incident will become more common occurrence on similar talk show? So, and there's the journalist behind the report accusing. Let me look at this. Journalists behind the report accusing Bibi Netanyahu of offering $150 million to Charlie Kirk is Max Blumenthal, a man who used to work for the Iran-backed newspaper Al-Arab and contributed to Al Jazeera. Why is it that every time we track down a lie, we end up finding? Now, the thing about the I didn't watch her show. So but I have followed the story of the Israel connection. Now the thing is that no one has actually said that the Israeli government itself offered money to Charlie Kirk. I mean that's a ridiculous story. And Max Blumenthal never said that Israeli government itself offered money. That's not how Israel operates. Israel operates through a variety of conduits, and clearly they were offering money to Charlie Kirk, very substantial sums of money. So that's how that is. So Israel operates through this network of billionaires. And these billionaires, they're inextricably tied to the Israeli government, and they're tied to the IDF. So they're not actually working, they're not actually in the employ of the Israeli government, but they're, in effect, that's what they are. So, things like this private equity fund, like Andreessen Horowitz, they invest in Israel. They provide money to the Israeli, to the IDF. They act as a shill for the Israeli government. And so when they offer Charlie Kirk large sums of money, which they did, then you could say it's Israeli government is doing it, but it's like it's one and the same thing. But to say somehow Netanyahu was offering him money, I mean that's just wrong, and it's an easy one to sort of well that's a ridiculous, that's a fake news to say that Netanyahu was offering him money, as if somehow this is a check. Israeli government will write a check to Charlie Kirk. That's not how it worked. Now Andreessen Horowitz, that's serious sums of money. These when you start getting money on that scale, then without question they want something in return. And of course, what they wanted in return is, given Charlie Kirk's stature, given his influence, they wanted him to use this money to pressure the members of the right, particularly young people on the right, to toe the Israeli line. And that Charlie Kirk really wasn't prepared to do. Or at least he did it in a half-hearted way, but he obviously had great qualms about it. So that's what was happening with Charlie Kirk. And so we have this Andreessen Horowitz. We have what was it? Bill Ackman, and then of course you had this guy Shillman. This also a billionaire. They're all billionaires. These absolutely implacable Israeli shills, Shillman, He withdrew money from Charlie Kirk because they didn't think that he was sufficiently zealously advocating on behalf of Israel. So, what was really going on in the case of Charlie Kirk was that Israel was afraid that it was going to lose its last bastion in the United States. I mean, the left had kind of soured on Israel a long time ago, and clearly within the Democratic Party there is a lot of disquiet and unhappiness with Israel. Israel knows this. Israel has always had certain problems on the left, but Israel could always rely on the right. They could always rely on the Republicans. They could always rely on MAGA, and that was the importance of Charlie Kirk. So Kirk would, he goes to young people, and he would persuade these young people, hey, Israel and Western civilization, traditional morality, traditional families, Christianity, all of these, nation states, against globalism, all the things that you love, all you MAGA, the right, the things that you love, the things that you want to go and fight for, the things that you want, you want Trump to give you. Israel embraces all of that in spades. That's what Israel is about. Christianity, traditional values, family, love of country, nation states, and hatred for globalism. So that was the core. There was the absolute bastion of Israeli support in the United States, and that's why Charlie Kirk was so important to the Israel lobby, because if they lose that, if suddenly these people, the members of the right, who were always 100% behind Israel, who would brook no criticism ever on Israel, if you lose that, then Israel is in trouble, because then it really doesn't have any constituency in the United States. And then, the nightmare for Israel, the long dreaded nightmare for Israel, is somehow the United States is going to go sour, would sour on Israel and would start applying pressure against Israel. That might become a reality. So that's why Charlie Kirk was so important to the Israel lobby, why they were giving him so much money. It wasn't coming from the Israeli government. It was coming from these billionaires who effectively are kind of, shills for the Israeli government. But they're not actually, it's not coming out of the Israeli treasury. And that's the sort of the fake news somehow that, Max Blumenthal suggested that Netanyahu himself was giving money to Charlie Kirk. And Blumenthal never said anything like that. But when you get money from Ackman or Shillman, then effectively, or Andreessen Horowitz, then you're essentially getting it from Israel. And that's why I think Charlie Kirk really ran into some serious issues, because the Israel lobby just simply couldn't afford to lose MAGA, and Charlie Kirk really wasn't towing the line. They told him, no Tucker Carlson at your Turning Point events, and he said, no, I'm gonna have Tucker Carlson speak at the next Turning Point event. And then he said, I'm going to have a debate on Israel with Marjorie Taylor Greene, that same Marjorie Taylor Greene that talks about Israeli genocide. He said, no, I'll have her, debate somebody at the next Turning Point event. But they told him, no, you can't, you can't do it. And that happened at this intervention meeting in the Hamptons that Bill Ackman admitted that it had happened. You know, it was all of these terrible people, you know, Ackman and, you know, Andreessen and Joshua Hammer and horror, these terrible Israeli shills. And I think Shulman, I think, was there. They all berated Charlie Kirk. They told him, "You got to play ball with us. You can't go around having debates on Israel. You can't have Dave Smith showing up at your events." So that only happened a few days before Charlie Kirk's murder. Now, you know, I'm not saying that there's a connection. That Israel was behind his murder, but it's clear that the story that the Israel lobby were putting out, and particularly Netanyahu himself, that somehow Charlie Kirk was the greatest friend Israel ever had, that was a fraud and a lie, and they knew it was a fraud and a lie. They got that story out precisely in order to cover up the enormous pressure that they were applying against Charlie Kirk because he wasn't towing the line. So that story. Oh, within minutes of the announcement of his death, they were saying, "Oh, he was the greatest friend Israel ever had." But a lot of money, and what was serious was, like, you know, when you get someone like Shulman, you know, who's this billionaire, withdrawing money, and he apparently did withdraw money from Turning Point, also sometime within just a few days before the killing of Charlie Kirk. That's, you know, a lot of money he withdrew. That's serious business, and I assume that during that intervention session at the Hamptons, they made clear to Charlie Kirk that they were ready to pull their funds out of his organization. That doesn't mean his organization would go under, but they were making clear, hey, you know, we command large sums of money, and if you lose that, well, you're going to have to scale down your organization. You're not going to be able to hold these big events and, you know, invite, you know, just about everybody under the sun, and, you know, wonderful parties and everything. You're going to have to scale all of that down. So I think there was a real, quite menacing pressure applied, and as I say, I think it was because Israel is afraid of losing its last bastion in the United States. It's MAGA. If you lose MAGA, then what do you have? But clearly he was losing it, and particularly losing it within Charlie Kirk's constituency, which is young people under 30. So that's anyway. Thank you, Cynthia. And then you know, Anne Marie, always very good to see you, Anne Marie. Anne Marie is a musical expert who's a, you know, very distinguished classical musician. Plays in a great orchestra and has played in some of the best orchestras in the world. And we're very fortunate to have, you know, the musical expertise from somebody who is herself a very distinguished musical practitioner. And so, you know, she provides very learned, informed commentary on the music that we post on the music club. And so we're very fortunate to kind of find out about music from inside, so to speak, for somebody who actually knows about music, knows from playing it. And that's, you know, we're really incredibly fortunate to have that. And I'm always looking forward to Anne Marie's very, you know, always fascinating and informed commentary on our music. So thank you so much, Anne Marie, and thank you, Anne Marie, for your generosity. Summer Petro says imperialism is a paper tiger, according to Mao. In his memoirs, Khrushchev profoundly disagreed. Yeah, I think so, but I think he said something. I can't remember who exactly that he referred to as a paper tiger. It's very interesting that um, Mao. I mean, we also think about uh, because we're so used to the kind of the anti-Soviet thrust of Western opinion, Western media, um, even Western scholarship, that somehow, when it came to the dispute between the Soviets and Mao, generally people take the side of Mao. Oh, well, the Soviets were obviously really mean and bullying and nasty, and Mao was just trying to assert his independence. But if you look back on what they were arguing about, I mean, obviously the Russians were right. I mean, Mao was insane. I mean, the policies he pursued were absolutely lunatic, and that's what the Russians were telling him. Yeah, what you're doing is absolutely bonkers. You're destroying your country. I mean, the Great Leap Forward was obviously going to be devastating. I mean, there was his plan. One of Mao's brilliant plans, in order to get a better harvest, was to start killing off sparrows, because the sparrows were helping themselves to the grain, and so there wasn't enough grain to go around for the country. So, we'll get rid of the sparrows. And so they went. There was a big, another one of Mao's great campaigns. Get rid of the sparrows. And of course, well, what happens when and it succeeded? They did indeed get rid of the sparrows. Well, what happened is, of course, that when you got rid of the sparrows, there was no one to eat the insects. So these locusts absolutely devastated China's agricultural produce. And now you really had a famine. Well, he didn't think of that. Now the Russians told him this is a really stupid idea, trying to get rid of sparrows. No, we did that. So it ended up with Mao having to bring sparrows into China. They had to start importing sparrows because they needed to deal with the locust problem. The collectivization, when the Russians were watching Mao's collectivization program, they said, yeah, what you're doing is absolutely insane. We know something about collectivization. We know about the mistakes that we made, but at least we gave the farmers, the peasants on the collective farm, at least we gave them their private plots. I mean, they obviously hated being the collective farms, but at least we tried to keep them happy by giving them their private plots, which is, after all, what they spent most of their time on. But Mao didn't want any of that. Mao, absolutely no private plots. These collective farms were just simply peasants living in barracks. They lived in barracks, ate communally, and simply had, no life whatsoever on their own. Everything was just regimented in this communal existence. And of course, Chinese agriculture was an absolute disaster again, which led to the famine, and of course the industrialization under the Great Leap Forward was absolute disaster, which was always obvious, having these little steel furnaces, in the farms, these collective farms, and they have a little steel furnaces. So the reason I'm reading this is that we kind of, the Western perception was that somehow Khrushchev was this really nasty character, and Mao was this the person we're supposed to sympathize with, but it was Khrushchev who was telling him that just use a little bit of common sense in what you're doing. But of course that didn't work. And then of course Mao went on to further loony enterprises, such as the cultural revolution, also not loony enterprise. And of course then we had the the one-child policy. All these are all absolute calamities, total calamity. One-child policy. Anyone could have foreseen that it would be a disaster, just like anyone could have foreseen that the Cultural Revolution would be a disaster. So, I think, this was so Khrushchev was always the sensible one, and you could see why Khrushchev withdrew Soviet cooperation on Chinese nuclear weapons program. It was too late. The China already had enough information that they could actually develop the atom bomb. I mean, the Soviets had provided them with that information, but you can see why Khrushchev said, "This is insane. We can't allow these people to have nuclear weapons." But it didn't. It didn't take. So anyway, that was just a sidetrack. When you see in his memoirs, Khrushchev's profoundly disagreed. I do think when you talk about the Sino-Soviet split, and people like Brzezinski and others, they all took the side of China. Nixon as well. He would be talking about Mao as a poet. He's a dreamer. But they were nuts in comparison with the Soviets. Anyway, thank you so much, Samba Petrus. And then Sinuk says, thanks for the discussion. How are Hungarians reacting to Trump's demand for NATO to stop buying Russian energy? Are they talking about it there? Well, there's not really, unfortunately, everything is so politicized. But it's interesting that you bring this up because the Hungarians now have made. All right, they made this clear that they're not. That they don't. That they're not going to go along with it, despite all of their goodwill towards Trump. He's their great friend. That they're just not going to do it. I'll just bring this up because of what the Hungarians said on this, particularly Pete Szijjártó, who was in New York, Hungarian foreign minister, and he made clear we're not playing along with Trump. And here's this. Here's Szijjártó, and this is Euronews. It says Hungary seeks to dodge Trump pressure to cut Russia oil imports. Hungary said that alternative routes wouldn't suffice to replace Russian pipeline oil after Donald Trump warned he would call Viktor Orban to tell him to stop buying Russian oil. In fact, he did call Orban, and Orban said, we need the oil. Experts say Hungary could use EU funds for the decoupling. Yeah, but the EU doesn't provide any funds for Hungary, and the sums involved are astronomical. And so it says here, Szijjártó rejected the calls, and we, of course, support all of President Trump's efforts for peace. However, our geographical location creates a reality, and we cannot change this reality, he emphasized in New York. And Szijjártó added that his country imports only 2% of Russia's oil exports, and said existing alternative routes from Croatia are not sufficient to replace this. And then he goes on. Orban, he's a friend of mine. I've not spoken to him, but I have a feeling that if I did, he might stop. And I think he'll be doing that. And but clearly Szijjártó says there's just no way. He argued against the decoupling, saying that alternative routes like the Adria pipeline through Croatia are not sufficient to replace the Druzhba oil pipeline. And so that's basically Trump's attempts to cajole Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey really are not going to. They're not going to work. I mean, these countries are, they're not economically the strongest in the world. They rely on inexpensive Russian energy. The whole idea that you could just simply switch over, first of all, either to some different crude from Russian crude, which is impossible because Hungary's refineries are geared towards Russian crude. You can't just simply switch over the same refineries to get for some other crude. But the point is that the alternative, getting it through the pipeline of Croatia, is just nowhere near, nowhere even remotely near to the Druzhba oil pipeline. That doesn't have the capacity, anything like the capacity of Druzhba. And if you try to transport the oil by truck from the ports in Croatia, I mean, it's just a huge undertaking. There's no way that you could do that. Hungary is not a rich country. Hungary doesn't have the resources simply to switch over to another crude from somewhere else, or to switch over to build other refineries, or massively increase the pipeline capacity from Croatia. It's not going to happen. I think, and Orban, I think, made clear to Trump. What's Trump going to do? There's nothing much he can do to Orban. I mean, Hungary is not exactly a huge trading partner of the United States. I mean, Hungary is already under tariffs because Trump has already imposed tariffs on the EU as a whole, and of course that applies to all imports from Hungary. I mean, look, what he's got with Turkey. And Turkey, so I mean, well, he doesn't care about Slovakia, but for instance, today he has Erdogan in the Oval Office. Well, he wants Erdogan to start buying all kinds of U.S. military hardware, some serious military hardware that he wants Erdogan to purchase, including the Patriot anti-missile systems. And it was Trump, who condemned vehemently Obama for having cut Erdogan out of the U.S. Patriot missile program, which led to Erdogan purchasing the S-400 anti-missile systems from Russia. And it was Trump who said, hey, we are driving Erdogan into the arms of Putin because we didn't provide Erdogan with the Patriot system. So now he's again saying, well, we're going to provide Erdogan with the Patriot system. So this isn't the right time to start threatening Erdogan, if you don't play ball with us on oil and gas imports from Russia. Turkey needs the oil and gas from Russia. It's a big deal, and Turkey makes a lot of money, through transit fees on the gas, through Turkstream and everything. So Turkey is not going to be giving any of that up. And these demands of Trump's are kind of ridiculous, because for what reason? For Ukraine? Yeah, I mean, that's not America first. I mean, it was one thing for him to say, well, we're going to impose tariffs on country after country because, well, we're running this trade deficit, and we need to address our trade deficit problem, and that's blah, blah. That at least is America first. But we got to, he's going to start threatening and bullying countries, and to do things that are contrary to their own national interest for Ukraine. I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah. So I mean, now it's possible Trump is doing this essentially to get himself off the hook. So to say, hey, well, I'm not going to impose sanctions on Russia as long as Europe continues to import fossil fuels from Russia. Why should I hurt the American economy if the Europeans still want to do business with Russia. I mean, that maybe that's a very reasonable argument. But at the moment, he's kind of threatening countries that are basically friends of yours. I mean, Orban was Trump's inspiration. I mean, Orban was Trump before Trump. It was Orban who blazed the trail on the immigration issue before Trump even took up the cause. So now you're trying to bully him, and it isn't going to work. Obviously, Orban said we're not a rich country, and we can't afford it. We can't afford getting our energy from somewhere else. There's just there's no way that can happen. So it's not going to happen. Anyway, then to go back to the question, how are Hungarians feeling it? The problem, as always happens, is that everything just becomes this polarized matter, just as in the United States. It's, everything just depends on, are you for Trump or are you against Trump? And then you see every issue in terms of, whether you're taking a pro-Trump view or an anti-Trump view. So in Hungary, it's very similar. You're going to take you're either pro-Orban or you're anti-Orban. So when it comes to this issue of energy, they somehow blame Orban for this. They're not quite sure why. And whenever you talk to them, and hey, what Orban is doing is obviously in the interest of Hungarians, which is cheap energy. I mean, you want cheap energy, or do you want to sort of, preoccupy yourself with Ukraine? They never really answer that question and say, "Oh, well, it's all Orban's fault anyway." Somehow or rather, it's his fault, because they can't really accept that everything that Orban has done when it comes to foreign policy has been geared towards what is in Hungary's national interest. You may not like him when he starts talking about Christianity or about the nation state or Hungary's historic destiny or whatever. I mean, you may not like any of that, but when it comes to these practicalities like cheap energy, then you have to support it. But they won't do it. They're just so obsessed with the hatred of Orban. Now, it is true that this what I'm describing is very much a phenomenon in Budapest, where Orban does not have a great deal of support. He has a lot more support out in the country, in the villages. They support him, but he is under pressure. He's been in power now 15 years. It's a tough one to continue after so many years. People get tired. There's a kind of fatigue with Orban. So I think he will have a tough re-election fight on his hands. That's not to say that he's going to lose. I mean, he's underwater now. He's about 8 points behind in the polls. He's pulled these things off before. He's been behind in the polls before, and he's won. But I think that one has to be realistic. When you've been around for so long, people get bored and then make bad decisions. I think voting for his opponent, this Peter Magyar, I think it's a really bad idea. I think Hungarians are going to regret that if Magyar does come to power. So anyway, Psinuk. So anyway, thank you, Psinuk. And then Psinuk says, it's funny how all this talk about recognizing Palestine actually did nothing to stop Israel's ethnic cleansing in Gaza. No one's talking about it 2 days later. What a disgrace. No, that's exactly right. And of course now with the American line, and this is the one articulated by Marco Rubio, is that, well, it's all their fault. It's all Macron's fault. It's all Starmer's fault. If only they hadn't recognized Palestine, Israel would not have done what he's been doing in Gaza, in the West Bank and in Gaza. They're just being encouraged. The more you do these things, the more it encourages Israeli ethnic cleansing. Of course, it's a totally dishonest, disingenuous argument because, of course, Israel's been conducting ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and of course, it's been massively increasing its settlement building in the West Bank, which had nothing long before Macron and Starmer recognized Palestine. But that's a nice excuse. Oh, it's your fault. Everything that happens now. Oh, it's your fault. It's Macron's fault because, of course, Israel is now responding to Macron. So yeah, and I think this is just going to continue. That's why the peace plan, the Trump peace plan, isn't going to get anywhere. I mean, Netanyahu is just going to continue doing what he's doing, and Trump himself has said, "Hey, you're rewarding Hamas. You recognize Palestine, so you're rewarding Hamas." Well, hey, the last thing we want to do is reward Hamas, so therefore Israel can just go ahead and do whatever he wants to do, which it would have done anyway. So anyway, thank you so much, Sinok. And then Robert says, what about this interpretation? Trump wants to distance himself from the Ukraine conflict without taking the blame when Ukraine collapses. That's why he strikes a posture of supporting Ukraine while scaling back U.S. involvement in practice. Just 10 billion more in weapons, which NATO now has to buy, versus the hundreds of billions given to Ukraine, with Ukraine only losing men and territory. Well, that's possible. I mean, I think that's he if that happens, let's say it happens that Ukraine collapses. Trump is not going to be able to say, "Oh, it had nothing to do with me," because he without question will be held to be responsible for it. So if that Ukraine collapses, then they'll say, well, that's because Trump didn't provide enough aid. In other words, they will use precisely your argument, Robert, which is, hey, he's not delivering the kind of huge weaponry assistance that he could have done and that Biden had done. So he's going to be held, he'll be blamed for it anyway. So I don't. In fact, by saying this, that hey, Ukraine can win this war, and then not following through by providing serious assistance, that only guarantees he's going to get really hit hard over the head. If that happens, if Ukraine does indeed collapse. So if that's the thinking, I don't think it's going to work for Trump, and particularly I think that if he does say that Trump now believes Ukraine can win this war, Ukraine can recapture all the lost territory, he's immediately going to come under pressure. Well, follow through on that. Now. We absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree. Now give us everything. Give us a lot more. Send everything because Ukraine can win this war. That's what we've been saying all this time. Ukraine can win this war. So, put your money where your mouth is. So he's gonna be the exact opposite. He's gonna come under pressure to do much more because he's now. I mean, before. When he was saying, I don't think Ukraine can win this war, then it's very hard because then it was very hard to put pressure on him to come up with more assistance because he says, look, I think that's just, we're pissing away good money. We're pissing away really good military equipment, which we could use somewhere else because Ukraine cannot win this war. So at least he had an argument then against providing military assistance. Now he doesn't have that. Now that he's saying Ukraine can win this war, then there's no excuse for not providing military assistance. So if that's his calculation, I don't think that's going to be. I think it's not going to work for him. Anyway, thank you, Robert, as always, for your generosity. And And then Steve Gaynor says, Russians probably wish their government were actually doing all this. That's apropos of Moldova. Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Every time I read these kinds of stories, I think, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if Russia were actually doing all of this? What's so interesting when with these kinds of stories is that that's pretty much the way people used to describe the great days of the Comintern. And it's true that in the heyday of the Comintern, it was very active. I mean, there was a real kind of energy about the Comintern, and they did organize meetings and conferences and put out all sorts of pamphlets, sent out fake letters and so on, like the Zinoviev letter and so on. So that was they really had some activism there. But when you read but these stories in Politico and everywhere else about what the Russians are doing, it's almost like you're transported back in time, sort of 90 years into the heyday of the Comintern. The Russians haven't been doing anything like that in decades, and they certainly aren't doing anything like that. They don't have the resources to what they're talking about. Remember one of the articles about the hundreds of millions of euros for Moldova? I mean, it's nuts. So basically, yeah, all of this is being made up by MI6 because MI6, they dust off all the old documents which they used to draft, about the Comintern, about Soviet propaganda, and Soviet agents of influence, and Soviet fellow travelers, and and all the rest of this, the Soviet assets. That they used to, throughout the Cold War. The intelligence agencies were throwing this stuff out, and the media would eagerly lap this up and talk about these agents of influence and fellow travelers and so on. So they've just dusted this off, and hey, this is what Russia is doing. Russia hasn't been doing this in 90 years. Anyway, so Steve says, yeah, Russians probably wish their government were actually doing all this. Yeah, absolutely. And then Steve says, who gave them the documents? No one. There are no documents. Either there are no documents, or they're just fake, or there's nothing in them other than kind of vague, uh, vague plans put forward by whoever, and at the top of the thing, SVR, of the logo. So yeah, I don't believe there are any such plans. Anyway, Anne Marie says this Sunday Switzerland will have a vote for the second time on the digital ID. There was one in 2021 which was rejected, and this time we will be able to vote again only because there was a referendum. People I know believe that another rejection wouldn't be accepted by the powers that be, and therefore the vote, in case negative, might be manipulated. Do you think this is possible? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's possible. I mean, I think that's almost certainly what will happen. I mean, the point is that all votes nowadays that don't go the way that the powers that be desire them are then manipulated. And so either if it goes the wrong way, you say it was because of the Russians. The Russians interfered. The Russians put out disinformation. Russian manipulated the media. Therefore, we have to rerun the referendum. Therefore, or we can ignore this vote, or you just simply, you could just manipulate it outright and declare, yeah, the vote was successful. The vote for the digital ID was successful. So either way, they're not going to accept a no vote. That whichever way they're going to decide, either they're going to declare that, hey, this referendum has to be cancelled because of Russian interference or whatever, or they'll just simply lie and manipulate the election as they've done before, like they've done in the case of Maya Sandu. Maya Sandu is just blatant, outright, open theft. It was clear that she didn't win any of those elections. So it's, that could be that, or they could just simply we had the Russian interference, and so we can't rely on this result, and therefore we're going to have to rerun it again. And you can just keep rerunning these votes until eventually you get the right outcome. You will eventually get the right outcome. You can just have the same, get people to vote until they get so tired because they just can't go on voting on the same thing over and over again. Then they just give up and say either they don't show up to vote or they'll vote in the appropriate way. So yeah, I mean, yeah. You say, do you think it's possible? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's possible. Anyway, thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And I think my time is up. So thank you very much, everybody who had joined me. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting, fascinating questions and comments. And above all, thank you for everyone who chipped in to the tip jar. It's what keeps the dogs in a reasonable mood, not particularly good mood, but reasonable mood. So they'll appreciate it to a certain extent. Or at least they'll keep me off my back for a while. So thank you very much. We'll be doing some podcasts over the weekend, and then next Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern time, and Peter and I will do our joint live stream, and then I'll be back solo on Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So hope to see all of you then. Until then, all the best. Good night. See you soon. Bye-bye.